My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
The United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime.
Could be longer and more difficult than some predict.
From the cost of individual strikes to widespread economic pressure, the cost of war with Iran is adding up fast. Since the start of this conflict on February 28, 2026, the United States has already spent upwards of $30 billion on weapons, munitions, logistics, and other outlying operating costs. A single Tomahawk missile costs approximately $1.3 million, and interceptor missiles range between $4 and $15 million. Flying a fighter jet, like an F-15 or F-35, can cost tens of thousands of dollars per hour. And that's before accounting for maintenance crews, fuel logistics, and support aircrafts. In March 2026, 3 U.S. fighter jets were mistakenly shot down by Allied Kuwaiti air defenses in a friendly fire incident. Fortunately, no lives were lost, but that mistake alone cost the United States $279 million. According to analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the cost of one day of war with Iran totals $891.4 million. The Center Square reported that the Trump administration may lobby Congress to approve $200 billion in funding for a full-scale war with Iran. $200 billion may be a lot to the average person, but it's only a small fraction of the taxpayer dollars America has spent over the past 25 years of war in the Middle East. After the al-Qaeda terror attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001, the Bush administration launched Operation Enduring Freedom on October 7, 2001.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
The Pentagon estimates the cost of the mission was nearly $900 billion. 18 months later, the Bush administration launched Operation Iraqi Freedom, which began with airstrikes followed by a full-scale ground invasion aimed at dismantling Saddam Hussein's regime, which the Bush administration accused of possessing weapons of mass destruction. The Pentagon estimates the total cost of that operation was nearly $1 trillion.
Other nations in history have fought in foreign lands and remain to occupy and exploit. Americans, following a battle, want nothing more than to return home. And that is your direction tonight.
The continuation of operations in the Middle East led to skepticism of the Bush administration's plans to successfully wind down operations in the region. One of the soldiers sent overseas during this time was John Burns. Burns has 22 years of service in the military as a non-commissioned officer of the United States Marine Corps and Army National Guard. He was on the ground in Iraq in 2004 and is now the Strategic Director for Concerned Veterans for America. Burns says the Bush administration undersold the cost of war and underestimated the difficulties of liberating Iraq and Afghanistan.
Certainly under the Bush administration, it was in the interest of the administration to sell the war very hawkishly and kind of brush aside the accounting for the costs until later. We said that Iraq was going to be a very quick mission. We had the mission accomplished, landing on an aircraft carrier shortly after the main, maneuver war, the war of big U.S. forces against what was left of Iraqi's mainstream military. And then it devolved into multiple years of counterinsurgency. Similarly, in Afghanistan, we accomplished most of our original mission of knocking down the Taliban and their military, as well as decapitating most of the al-Qaeda forces and certainly reducing them to a non-military factor. We turned that into a 20-year occupation, essentially a debacle, where U.S. forces tried to rebuild Afghanistan in the mold of what we thought it should look like in the mold of Western democracies, and it wasn't a culture fit.
The world saw the death of Osama bin Laden in 2011 during a U.S. Special Forces raid in Abbottabad on May 2nd. America also officially withdrew combat troops from Iraq the same year.
I can report that, as promised, the rest of our troops in Iraq will come home by the end of the year. After nearly 9 years, America's war in Iraq will be over.
Meanwhile, the Arab Spring quickly reshaped the power dynamics in the Middle East, leading to regime change in Egypt and Libya, as well as a civil war in Syria, which became a foothold for ISIS to grow its influence in the region. These developments kept American forces in the region and led to a near-decade fight against ISIS.
I can announce that America will lead a broad coalition to roll back this terrorist threat. Our objective is clear. We will degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL. We took out Osama bin Laden and much of al-Qaeda's leadership in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We've done so while bringing more than 140,000 American troops home from Iraq and drawing down our forces in Afghanistan, where our combat mission will end later this year.
The fight against ISIS is widely considered to have ended when U.S. forces killed ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi on October 26, 2019. 2 years later, in August 2021, the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan, marking the end of the longest war in American history. The method of the withdrawal prompted debate, particularly after 13 U.S. service members were killed and military equipment valued at roughly $7 billion was left behind.
The United States ended 20 years of war in Afghanistan, the longest war in American history. We were left with a simple decision: either follow through on the commitment made by the last administration and leave Afghanistan, or say we weren't leaving and commit another tens of thousands more troops going back to war.
The Department of Defense estimates the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria cost about $1.6 trillion in direct military spending. Spread across U.S. taxpayers, that's roughly $8,278 per taxpayer. Those numbers are strictly related to combat funding, such as weapons, munitions, jets, and tanks, amongst other warfighting materials. The real cost drivers for the past quarter century of war will not show up in the Pentagon's numbers. The cost of interest on deficit spending to fund the wars in the Middle East is growing every day and continues to add to the costs of the wars, with nearly $2 trillion added to the national debt due to growing interest. However, the growing interest is not the only hidden cost that will continue to grow over time.
So we're talking about $8 trillion in cash in those wars, plus billions more in costs of lives, and probably trillions more in costs of economic contribution of almost 40,000 Americans that we've lost. I've seen estimates that veterans' health care from veterans who served in the war, the global war on terror, as they age into midlife and into many of us into our senior years, between now and 2050, we could end up closer to $50 trillion for veterans' health care over the next 2.5 decades. This is something, there are more veterans who are combat afflicted, which means there'll be more veterans getting more of their health care from the VA at much more cost to the government, rather than sharing that cost with insurance companies, with Medicare, with Medicaid, and other government programs that might cover some of these health care choices, TRICARE as well, if they retire out of the military. If they're combat afflicted, a lot of this is going to come out of the VA. And again, that could be as high as $50 trillion in the next 25 years.
Researchers at Brown University's Costs of War project include long-term veteran care, disability benefits, homeland security, reconstruction, and interest on borrowed funds. When all these factors are included, the total cost of the post-9/11 wars is approximately $8 trillion.
My fears about Iran are that we have the same misunderstanding, right? All we have to do is knock down their military, knock down their Revolutionary Guards Council, work with the Israelis to decimate their proxy forces. But that's really hard to do. It's easy to say, but things always happen that require more troops, more military on the ground. It gets very, very complicated to assume that we're going to have a strike and it's going to go smoothly, and that the next step is going to go smoothly. Sooner or later, in war and military operations, we have Murphy's Law, right? Eventually something is going to go wrong.
With the nation still paying the costs of 25 years of warfare in the Middle East, how much more will taxpayers be asked to fund, and is it worth the cost?